Welcome to a new edition of Expert Insights hosted by IPS. Today we are happy to welcome Professor Charles Harvie, Professor of Economics from the University of Wollongong in Australia. Professor Harvie, welcome to Sri Lanka and welcome to the IPS.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Professor Harvie, your specialization of research is usually in small and medium enterprises, SMEs, and economic development. SMEs are a particularly important sector in Sri Lanka as it pretty much is the backbone of the Sri Lankan economy. In terms of your general research on SMEs, what are some of the key challenges that SMEs face in terms of development and growth?
It's quite interesting when you look at many Asian countries, a common theme comes, or common themes come through. One critical issue is access to finance is a continuing problem facing many firms, access to technology, access to skilled labour, access to markets. These tend to be critical issues, arising from the fact that small businesses have limited resources. These days, with market circumstances changing very rapidly, there's a need to develop new products, new ways of producing to be competitive in the marketplace. And of course, having limited resources does inhibit the growth of small businesses in many ways, as I've identified.
One of the challenges that Sri Lankan SMEs find is in terms of tapping into global value chains or in terms of exports. How could SMEs adapt to that, or what could governments do in terms of facilitating that adaptation?
That's a very important issue these days. Many countries in Asia are trying to attract foreign direct investment and to try and ensure that local producer suppliers can lock into those value chains, and particularly the higher value adding activities. You tend to find that for developing countries they're locked in at the lower part of the value chain in more labour intensive, less knowledge and skill intensive activities. So the capture of the total value add of the final product is relatively small. So the challenge is to move up, which comes about through price competitiveness, quality competitiveness, improved productivity, knowledge and education of the workforce, and the capacity to be innovative and creative. These I think are very important aspects, as well as being IT literate, the ability to use electronic commerce, which is fundamentally important to participate in value chains.
In terms of getting them into the formal sector, this is another issue that Sri Lanka faces, that there's quite a significant informal sector. How do we address that issue, and what can be done in terms of policy?
I think this is very important. Many firms decide to remain informal because the costs of becoming formal are quite expensive, the registration process and the costs involved in that. Plus, once you become formal, you have to comply to certain conditions, labour conditions, environmental conditions, and so on and so forth, and safety conditions for the product. That can be very expensive for many small firms, and of course, many of these informal firms tend to be small family firms. The challenge, as you suggest, is to encourage them to become formal, to make the ease of registration a lot simpler, but also by becoming formal, they gain access to the formal banking system. Many informal enterprises, there's limited potential for growth because they're restricted to family savings or whatever. So the challenge is, and I totally agree, is the need to become formal to make the whole process less costly and to show the advantages to enterprises of becoming formal, access to finance and growing the business.
Right. So now you've been visiting Sri Lanka for the past 2 weeks or so, and you visited quite a few firms, including SMEs. What are some of the key takeaways that you've taken from your field visits so far?
Common theme, access to finance. Which is quite surprising because we've also spoken to banks. They're indicating that they are lending to small business, but I think for many small businesses they have difficulty because of the lack of transparency. Many of them don't have business plans, they don't have the capacity to produce business plans, they may not have a good credit rating. So all of these aspects make it very difficult to get access to finance through the formal banking system, but that's absolutely critical. Other aspects, I think, limited technology, need to upgrade technology. That's always been a challenge. And one interesting development I think we've identified is access to skilled workers. We visited a factory just a couple of days ago, and the biggest challenge they had was that, well, they got their workforce mainly from institutions, technical institutions, skilled workers with technical skills. The challenge they had was retaining those workers. either the possibility of losing those workers to other companies who are perhaps able to offer more attractive salary packages, or migrating to achieve higher incomes elsewhere. And we know that there's a large amount of migration from Sri Lanka, knowledge and experienced and educated workers overseas. So that's a real challenge, I think, for Sri Lanka to try and retain those workers within the country.
Right. And moving on from the challenges, maybe let's end up with on a positive note in terms of opportunities. What are some of the key opportunities you may have witnessed?
Opportunities, I mean, I think there are many small firms that have the potential to grow. We've been quite impressed by the firms that we've visited. They may not necessarily be representative of Sri Lankan firms as a whole, because we've obviously seen some of the best performing, but we've been impressed by those firms' attempts to improve the quality of their products, to think increasingly about exporting their products overseas, to upgrading the knowledge and skills of their workforce. Those aspects, I think, are coming through, because the reality is that the Sri Lankan market is very small, and there's only a limited amount of growth there, so that there's a need to look outside, to consider exporting, to participate in value chains, which does mean developing products to meet the needs of those multinational enterprises, being price competitive, quality competitive, and the capacity to deliver on time. So I think there's a lot of challenges still there for Sri Lankan companies to satisfy those requirements and to be accepted into those value chains. I think the potential is there, but I think more work probably needs to be done. From my own perspective, one area I think that perhaps more could be done is developing closer linkages between industry and universities. There seems to be a very limited connection there, and it would be very interesting to see the potential of commercialising some of the research being conducted at universities through the establishment of incubators. For example, at my own university, the University of Wollongong, the university has established an innovation campus in which it actively encourages researchers at the university to think about commercialising their product. So they're establishing incubators for these potential new entrepreneurs with these new ideas or products that they've actually got. And the university tries to facilitate their access to finance, venture capital, and so on and so forth. So that's something I'd like to see happen more in Sri Lanka. I don't see much of that connection, and I think for many countries in the region, I visited Indonesia 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they're now very actively pushing this university industry linkage to try and commercialise the research and development that's taking place at these institutions, to create new ideas, new products, new higher value adding activities.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor Harvie. That was, I think, you hit the nail on the head, so to speak, when you spoke about the connection between universities, the academics, and the industry, and making that connection. So hopefully next time you come to Sri Lanka, we'll see some progress on that sphere. And thank you very much for visiting us at IPS, and hope you enjoy your visit here.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.